So, hello to all Business English 3 students from the home studio once again. I wanted to go over some of the material that was posted this week and contribute a little bit to the discussion. We'll start with that element. This week we are discussing the role of government. And on the first page, we have this big question, what are governments for? And you have several statements. It says, some people argue that governments have too much power, that they interfere with market forces, and that too much regulation is bad for business. And then we have a question, do you believe that there is too much or too little government in your country and that there are unnecessary laws or not enough laws? For example, do you think any of the following tasks should not be undertaken or regulated by the government but should be left to the private sector and the market system? And this is an interesting question for me because I have two countries. I'm a resident of the United States, and then I live here in Serbia and have been doing so for about the last 10 years. So, there's not enough time to talk about every one of these issues, clearly. So when I think of these particular issues, and I use my home country as an example for contrast to offer some perspective, then when it comes to education and healthcare, I'll address those particular elements. I'm going to lead with healthcare, actually, even though it's point two. And this is one of those subjects where I think in America there is a significant lack of government presence in the healthcare industry. Many people in America believe that this should be operated by the private sector. And for this reason, there has been very little socialized welfare or medical coverage in America, with the exception of veterans who have served in wars or in the military, and the elderly. So my personal belief is that it's a cruel system to put something like health in the modern world, with every other advanced nation having some kind of national healthcare system, in the hands of the private sector almost exclusively. I think that it's kind of a testament to the individualistic and selfish basis of some of the politics in America that we don't have a better system. I, in my experience anyway, have had better coverage here in Serbia, despite many fewer resources and potentials, or potential for taking care of people. So while there are major problems in this system, there at least is a system. In America, that's just severely lacking, especially for the standard of living that America has. So I think that in America, healthcare is a catastrophe. And I think that we're seeing some of that right now during the coronavirus crisis. That's something I've believed for a long time, that our government should be more involved in the healthcare industry. I'm not saying that there's not room for private insurance, just like we have still additional room for private hospitals and private insurance here in Serbia, but that the government must meet a basic requirement. And in many modern constitutions and unions, there is the right to health is discussed as a fundamental right. And I think at this level of advanced civilization, that should be something that America takes on as well, and they're an outlier. When it comes to education, this is a component which has traditionally been pretty strong in America. There's been public schooling since very early in the country. Of course, that depended on if you were a man or a woman, or if you were black or white. So our educational systems, while they were existent for a long time, excluded a huge chunk of the population, but in modern times have been more inclusive. In those modern times, around in the 70s, actually, America had the best results when it came to international testing of any school system in the world. I think that since that time, we have fallen on hard times, and part of that is because education has become less and less prioritized, while advanced education, like university education, whether it's state facilities or in private facilities, has gone up astronomically in price. So I think that there are gaps that need to be rectified in supporting public education at every level, that things like teachers' salaries and salaries for psychologists in these schools and funding for the appropriate tools and resources for this particular global age need to be more emphasized, because without an educated populace, you can't succeed as a nation. But if you're in power, you can certainly keep them in check. So sometimes that's what government is trying to do, is keep its citizenry in check. So I just want to comment on those particular items. I could say something about all of these, but we don't have time for that. And I'm looking forward to hearing your opinions on some of these matters, and I'm happy to see that some of you have already posted some of your opinions, and I look forward to hearing more before new material is posted in just a couple days on Thursday. So, we had a couple readings that were also associated with the role of government, in particular related to economics, but economics is everywhere, so every one of these issues plays a role in the economy. So we had this first question in the 2A reading, which is from a talk by J.K. Galbraith. And at the top it says, what areas does Galbraith describe as responsibilities of the state that were not in the list in number 1? I mean, one might seem like a long list for discussion, but the government's pretty large, and it kind of puts itself in a little bit of everything. And even though the list is pretty long in number 1, there are a few areas that are not mentioned. So the ones I wrote down are parks and recreational facilities, which I'm very thankful that we have. And for example, in America, which started the entire concept of national parks, and which has since been adopted by many countries around the world, I'm very happy that the government has taken a role in protecting and preserving these places and giving us places to enjoy. There is also the mention of libraries, which is related to education, clearly, but it's not directly referenced in the discussion page in number 1. Then they mention the research element, which governments are also involved in on many different levels, and I think that's part of our responsibility as a nation, or as a government, or as a people, or as a species, to investigate, whether that's medical research or whether it's space research. And I like to see more and more funding put in those areas when it's possible. And finally, the environment is indirectly referenced, and that's not really covered in the discussion element on the first page, except indirectly in relation to health, safety, and cleanliness, which is clearly related to the environment. So, that's the answer to 2A. The comprehension questions we'll go over. It says, what does Galbraith say about people who criticize government services? And my answer to that is basically, those who criticize government services already have enough money to cover such services, right? So if you're in a privileged position and you're doing fine, then you probably feel like you don't want the government taking some of your tax money and spending it on other people. I think that's a bit callous, and I think it's deconstructive, and I think it's also a little bit ignorant. I think that people who make those arguments forget that the roads and the infrastructure and all those elements that make it possible for them to do their jobs are also paid for by the government, even if they're not directly related to their job. Question 2 says, why, according to Galbraith, is the market system not sufficient to guarantee scientific research? And the essential answer is that the market is focused on short-run returns. Basically, they want a quick buck. And if they don't see a soon-to-be profitable situation, then they're not likely to invest in research. And this is where the government can step in particular in medical research, to try to point and allocate some funding towards these research elements. And finally, there's this question, and this is not a comprehension question so much as it is a discussion question. Again, according to what you have read here, how would you characterize Galbraith's politics? I think this very much depends on where you live. I think in some countries which have a more, let's say, socialistic democracy approach, then this is probably middle of the road. In America, these would be fairly extreme beliefs. I would put, especially when it comes to like things like good society and badly housed or homeless people being an issue, and low-cost housing being available. This is not a place where the government gets heavily involved in America. But in America, socialism is kind of a bad word. So I think you could call it socialistic, which in many places would be normal. In America, that would be extreme. But in a more positive a more positive way of saying that would be liberal, or what I would call progressive, which is what I say when I say progressive is it's very close to liberal, but you're focused on the overall progress of society. And for that to happen, the government needs to play an essential role. Otherwise, we're going to just go back to might makes right, and whoever is powerful stays powerful. So for me, the government is to provide a balance of power and representation to people who, when they come into this world, do not have it. We have another element that's vocabulary, so I'll just go through this. Find words or expressions in the text which mean the following. So number 1, obvious. The word is evident. Number 2, inexpensive. The phrase or word is low cost. Number 3, inconsistent with or contrary to. This would be at odds with. Number 4, bad health. This is illness. That's very straightforward. Number 5, remembered or not forgotten. This is a more idiomatic phrase. It's borne in mind. Number 6, poor or unemployed people would be the underclass. Number 7, rich or wealthy people would be affluent. You can be the affluent, or you can simply be affluent people, like an adjective. Number 8, successes, achievements. That's straightforward. Number 9, unwillingly or not eagerly. That is reluctantly. And number 10, global or worldwide, planetary. Right? That's pretty straightforward. So then we had 2D reading. And the first comprehension question, this is coming from Milton and Rose Friedman's book, Free to Choose. You have this question at the top which says, what is Friedman's opinion of the activities of the U.S. government? And I think, we could say this in various ways, but essentially, I would say it like this, that he believes that the American government has gone beyond necessary, and in the process has limited economic freedom, and freedom of other kinds. So, then we have these comprehension questions, and here there are more, but they're, I think, more direct in the first reading. Number 1 says, in which sentence do the Friedmans criticize taxation? I would say it's not just one sentence. I would mainly say it's between lines 9 through 12, if you look at the side numbers. What do they say about road safety legislation? Basically, they seem to be upset that no one can buy a car without seatbelts, and that seatbelts are mandatory. Number 3, what is the only restriction that they believe to be necessary regarding professional occupations, business, and trade? And essentially, it's that the choice is not be forced upon the people. So, to restrict business to not using force would be the essential protection. Number 4, what do they say about the law regarding, for example, doctors and dentists? And essentially, it's you are not free to offer your services as a doctor or a dentist without specific permits or licenses. Number 5, what is their objection to the law regarding labor contracts? Here, they disagree with the government providing rules and regulations which prevent an employer and an employee from coming to mutually agreed upon terms that they would both be okay with. Number 6, according to what you have read here, how would you characterize the Friedman's politics? This is, again, a subjectively personal question. My immediate reaction would be, if I could put it in short, inapplicable and kind of naively idealistic. I think if people as a species treated each other better and had a more long-term view, then some of these would work. But I think that Milton and Rose Friedman's idea that the market would take care of these, and that if you were a bad doctor and a bad dentist, people would simply stop going, is a naive perspective. I think that these permits and regulations that they're fighting against, that they say restrict our freedoms, ensure our safety. And I think it's a little bit ridiculous that someone could claim to be a doctor and provide their services, or a dentist, without a permit or a license. And there are many professions that go along with that. So I think those are a necessary element in modern government. Otherwise, when do we find out that there's a bad doctor or a dentist? When a bunch of people die and a bunch of people suffer. So for me, many of their criticisms are too strong. I also believe in freedom. And down below in the discussion elements, it says, do you agree with Milton and Rose Friedman concerning any of the specific examples they give of government legislation? I would say there's just one. I think most of their, I'm kind of on the other side from them on most of these issues, although clearly there are governments that violate freedoms much more profoundly than what they point out here, and I'm against more, I'm against socially limiting freedoms. So, for me, one example of that in which the government kind of goes overboard is seatbelts. I think that there shouldn't be laws for seatbelts once you become an adult. When you're a kid and you don't have everything figured out, then you should be required to wear a seatbelt until a certain age, like 18. But after that, it's up to you. If you want to put yourself in a more risky situation because it makes you more comfortable, you're an adult and you can make that decision. And that's generally my perspective on a lot of things, where if you want to do it and you're not going to hurt other people, then the government shouldn't decide whether or not you can do that. If that's taking a certain drug at home or not wearing a seatbelt in a car and you're going to be the only one who suffers consequences from that, then I'm fine. I also understand that there's an argument for making you wear seatbelts, that they are the complex psychological repercussions of accidents. If you were to die because you didn't have a seatbelt on and someone else was driving the other car, or the medical costs, the reactive medical costs to seatbelt injuries, which could cause a spike in healthcare costs. So I think that there are legitimate arguments on both sides, but I think the government shouldn't step in. I think it should be fairly I would say it should be more reluctant to impose its regulations on social choices that affect just a single person or the individual. So finally, we have some vocabulary from this, and I'm just going to do the matching. So number 1, costly, the match would be C, expensive, that's very clear. Number 2, disposed of, would be H, spent, used, or consumed. Number 3 would be D, done for us. So on our behalf is done for us. Often we use the expression someone spoke on our behalf. Number 4, a physician. That is B, a medical doctor. We clearly know that. 5, ailments would be E, non-serious illnesses, like bothersome conditions. Doesn't mean they're not painful and they're not problematic. It just means they're not non-life-threatening, for example. Number 6, to resort to force would be I, to use violence. 7 is to coerce. That would be to compel to do something, to compel people to do something against their will. Number 8, a mortician is simply someone who arranges funerals. Number 9, a plumber. G, someone who fixes water pipes and things associated with them, like toilets and bathrooms and everything in those kind of areas and kitchens. And number 10, a host of, this will be the only one left, a large number of. So, we have some discussion questions here. We have, do the Freedmen specifically oppose any of Galbraith's arguments in 2A? I would say that while they don't directly mention every issue, and neither does Galbraith in his writing, they indirectly, I would say, oppose almost everything Galbraith says. They seem to have the perspective that the market will take care of itself and will self-regulate. I think that history has proven this very false since the ideas of free market theory and the 17th century that Adam Smith started developing. So for me anyway, when it comes to discussion, we have questions like, is reading Galbraith or the Freedmens cause you to alter your opinion about the government in your country or in the USA? Do you see government as a necessary institution spending taxpayers' money in an enlightened way, or as a powerful institution limiting your freedom, or somewhere in between? I would say it's somewhere in between. I think that there are problems in this country, for example, where the government has overstepped its bounds, and I've had many students comment on how the government is pushing itself into the sphere of media in a way that is extremely problematic in this country right now, and there have been protests because of this. Not only because of that, but that's one. And I think they've also become extremely corrupt in their kind of autocratic usurpation of the political process. I think many of us are aware that there's not much of a multi-party option in this country right now, even though there are parties that exist. So, I would say I'm more on the progressive side and believe that the government has to play an active role and a protective role in many industries. There are clear industries where they can overstep their bounds. I can't think of many in America other than, I'd say, the drug wars, where, I mean, the government in America is less active in many aspects than European socialistic democracies. So there are fewer issues where I'm like they've stepped too far. I think they've often done too little. But in the end, somewhere in between is right. But for me, leaning more to the progressive side would be a more ideal government. And I think that history and current sociology has shown that societies who are the most happy, who have the highest standard of living, and where they are closer to what we often call like end of history status, are countries which apply socially democratic principles, whether we think about the Scandinavian countries or we think about Iceland as an example, we think about Australia or Canada in a more conservative, have a more conservative approach, but still apply some of these policies. Japan, South Korea, most of the advanced nations have governments that are more in line with Galbraith's perspective, and I think that the populations who are more happy and more well off are the evidence that those systems work. That's my opinion. You could have a different one, and I look forward to seeing them in your posting, so hopefully those will continue to show up. Hopefully the answers to these particular situations have become clear, and in the coming week we will kind of continue to push this theme along a little bit, and we'll have new homework and a new activity on Thursday, combining several of the factors. So until then, continued good work and good luck, and stay safe with these elements. And I look forward to seeing, any additional comments that you offer on this particular material as well as the upcoming material. Good luck. Bye.